Today we're going to talk about paint, controlling the water when you're painting. So I've already gone ahead and done most of this tutorial, and this is pretty much our final outcome for this class, where we want to see how the water moves, and we want to see what happens when we have lots of water and put the paint into it. What happens when we put water onto a surface that's already been painted? We get something like a run back. We're going to talk about lifting. We're going to talk about mixing, allowing two colors to blend and mix by themselves. Just doing straight lines and how you can pull the color across the paper, and how when you lift the brush, the paper will flow out. So there's lots of different techniques in controlling your paint. Okay, so in the last class for 101, we talked about the wetness of the paper, how wet your paper needs to be. Now let me just clarify when I'm saying that. What I'm talking about is doing a flat wash that's going to look something similar to this, where you have no blooms, no runbacks, no cauliflowers as we call them, which is where there's a puddle of water, and the water then, as it evaporates, it squishes out. As it dries, it makes like this bloomy effect, which, you know, sometimes you want that, say if you're doing some flower, but you don't always want that. For example, if you've got a beautiful sky, you don't want these runbacks, or these blooms or cauliflowers, whatever you want to call them, in the sky. I'm putting the water down and I'm just moving it around to evenly cover the entire area that I want to have done. Now, if I move this paper, see how the sheen is actually leaving. It's really warm up here. I just had the heater on, and I have like a turbo heater. Okay, so I can see that this is still wet, but here it's dried. So I want to go back and make sure that it's all wet everywhere. And now this one, see how that one is completely dried? So if I try to put paint on here now, this part has completely dried, and the paint wouldn't flow at all. So feel free to go over it a few times. Now, if you're in a wet environment or a cool environment, it might take a lot longer to dry. But see, that's really not that much water. It's a consistent, I can see that it's nice and consistent. It's nice and even all the way across. And you could do this as many times as you want. Now, just a side note here, that really depends on the quality of your paper. I'm using 300 gram, which is 140 pound. This is just a house brand paper. It's from Bros Nuremberg. I can't do a lot of erasing on it, but I can add water a few times without any problems. And you can see that because it's 300 gram, it's not buckling at all. I'd have to add a lot more water for it to buckle. But for now, we're just looking at that sheen. Where'd it go? See that? See how up here it's still a little wet, but down there it's really drying out. So same problem. Okay, so let me do this fast. I'm just going to add the water on. Okay, so down here the sheen is correct. Let's add too much water up here. Let's really sap it up. Let's like make actual water drops, okay? See how you can't even really see the texture of the paper in the middle because there's so much water? I mean, there's a puddle. I can move it around. Now, as I grab my paint, and let's use some cerulean blue, because this little butterfly guy here is blue. Now, how much paint do I have? I'm going to have to do this quick. I gotta add more water. Really wet. Now watch what happens when I drop the paint in. And I'm even going to squish it in using my water brush. Let's see if this even works. There we go. See how it runs? And it's just going to run, and now this is on an angle, so it's going to run wherever. Right into the bottom. This might be something you want, you know. You might be like, yay, I want to make my paint run, and then you want to like make it run all over the place, and woo, off it goes. Let's go crazy with the paint. Let it run, yeah. Okay, now let's just leave that there. I'm really tempted to move it because I don't like it. Let's add some more. That's more fun. Let's add some drops. Now, this is on the top of a bubble, and the paper is bubbling because now it's got a ton of water. It's bubbling down. So if I add the water, the paint, it's going to end up down here. Here it's not bleeding very much, funny enough. But do you see how that's kind of sitting in the water? It's really not even touching the paper. As the paper dries, of course, it will touch the paper. It will eventually soak down into the paper, but for now it's kind of up. So I'm gonna drop a few more spots in here. Okay, so that's one option. That's where you have tons of water and we just kind of leave it and let it sit for a long time. So let's see how long it takes that to dry. Controlling the water. So we've got a lot of water on there. I can see some of the texture of the paper. Maybe we want to make even more. We're really going for sopping wet. So when I add the wet paint here, and this is something we're definitely going to have to talk about in a minute. You see how I was able to pull that spot? Let's do that again. I'm able to put the paint down and yank it along, right? Now, on the other hand, if I just drop it, it will bleed out. So those are our two, pull or drop. We'll get back to that in a second. So let's throw some paint in here. Go back and forth. Okay, and we see how much that moved. Now, what if we do the same thing over here? Now, what I need to do is move the paper to get those flows. Paint doesn't always flow. Sometimes it does, doesn't always flow. It really depends on what you've got. If you add, there are some things such as ox gall, which is nasty as can be because it is actually the liquid from the gallbladder of an ox, which is nasty and also mean. But if you add that to your paint, it will flow really well. So some manufacturers of paints will add ox gall to their paint, others not. So here we've got a tomato. Now I left a little bit in the center. I'm just letting the paint bleed. Just leave it here. This side there's not so much water. Here there's tons of water. In fact, look at that. Okay, so here I dropped some water. Now, what if I come to that with some, sorry, I dropped some paint. What if I come to that paint and get really close and touch the paint? And let's come across here and just touch it. See how that's happening? It's pulling, well, theoretically, it's on a down. Let's go the other way. There we go. Now I've got pretty wet paint here, and I'm going to do it again. Now, do you notice that? Every time I lift the brush, it's going to release a tiny bit of paint. See? Release, 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 release. If, on the other hand, I just pull it, I can pull a pretty even amount of paint without releasing anything, and I end up with the paint at the bottom. Here's the puddle. The puddle is right here. Now, when I let this go, watch what happens. Run back, run back, run back. Look at that. Look at that. That's a cauliflower right there. It's because the water is pushing the paint. So it pushed the paint out of the way, and it's going to give me this weird, nasty little liney thing. Although, maybe that won't be so bad. So let's say, what if I did a run back because it's not up here? What if I add fresh water up here? See how that pushes it back? Okay. So if I push back enough, so now it's an even run back, I'm going to end up with a nice, strong, crisp line here. I've pushed all the paint back, and I could leave it there. Now, this is the part that's really hard for me because I don't want to leave it there. What I want to do is come back with a brush and take all this sopping water out and clean it up. I was watching someone recently, Anna. I'll put her link in. I was watching Anna recently, and she is so funny. She lists artists. She's on YouTube, of course. I'll put her channel in. She lists different artists and what different types of artists. So you've got crazy artists, messy artists, obsessive compulsive artists. Anyway, she's got a whole slew of different titles, and the question is, which artist are you? Now, I don't necessarily know which artist I am, but I think her explanation, one of them, of course, was the OCD Artists, and it was hilarious. So if you guys have time, I highly recommend going and checking that out. So I've got a square. It's at that perfect stage, see? Nice sheen. I can see the texture of the paper. We're just going to drop some paint in and see what happens. Now my paint is pretty wet, okay? It's almost like drawing with a pencil, or like a crayon, like it's almost that thick. Now, more paint. Red. Okay, so I'm using the paints right out of here, out of my little palette. There's some water down here.
but up here is just the paint. So I can either select the watery paint, which is, you know, like milky or creamy kind of consistency. Let's say it's like soy milk. Or I can take this stuff, which is more like a thick honey. Well, in this case, probably a thin honey, but you know what I mean. So that's what I've got. I'm not adding too much water. Okay, let's put some color in it. Alright, now let's imagine we're painting a little more like Coco Bee, which means, and have you seen Coco Bee's channel? Beautiful, beautiful stuff. She likes to do an awful lot of loose, wild paint. Okay, there's a ton of this going on. Mind you, it's not all on top of water where it's going to bleed, and nor is it necessarily green and red. What am I doing? Thinking of Christmas here? Okay, we have a run here. I want to tap it in, and it goes, okay. Dry it off. Here too. Oh good. Just love the sound effects. Now I have a great video on how to make blooms if you go back to my 101s. And what I did there was I took something when it was almost dry, and that's the key. Like here, let me see this one over here. Here, where it's almost dry, and you want to drop some fresh water into it. It's pushing the paint, making what would be known as a nasty run back, or cauliflower. But this part is going to be a mess. Now, I will tell you guys in the next tutorial, the next 101, how to deal with runbacks once you have them, how to get rid of them. Go back in and you can lift that color out. This is one of those things that's really, really, really important. Really important. Did I stress that enough? Okay, you guys want to take some time and figure out how to lift paint, because this is going to be one of those things where you're able to shape something, you're able to give it more definition, you're able to add a highlight. Now let's say I wanted to add something here. Maybe I want this to be a little softer over there. I can just lift it out. Now lifting out is, it's a kind of finicky. You really have to wait until the paper is somewhat dry. So pretty much the same point, I mean this one anyway, it's still really wet over here, but this is really hard for me to just try to say it and explain it. You have to practice. So get out your paints, your brushes, your water, and start throwing it on your paper. Okay, it's dry. I lifted the paint off in the middle, but there's definitely different amounts of paint. There's like a splotchy part here and a splotchy part here. Here it's pretty even. Here it's nice and even. Here our run back was kind of atrocious. This one is finally dried, and there are, oops, that center one wasn't dry. It is now. There are no runbacks here, and none here as well. Way down here we can see that this is totally dry, and we definitely have this little spot.
And Wet and Wet is not about putting water on your paper and then dropping paint. You can do that, and if you do that, the water will spread. But there's more to it. It's about knowing where you want the water to go, using your brush, putting the wet where you want the water, where you want the paint to flow, and then controlling it with your brush. And you can do that with a dry brush, with a wet brush. You can do that by adding more water. You can do that by removing paint or removing water with a thirsty brush. You can use something like a sponge or some paper towel or a cloth. I should have one here on my desk somewhere. There it is. Or a cloth. Now I recommend using an old cloth if you're going to do that, because it will really mess the cloth. This one I've used for a long time. I don't know if you guys can tell, but it's pretty messy. And I just throw it into the washing machine and keep using it. I've got 3 or 4, so when one is really dirty, it goes to the wash, and then I keep going. That being said, I do use paper towel, even though I try to use the cloth as much as possible. Paper towel is really, really important, I have to say, for certain techniques when you really want to lift out tiny bits. Now, controlling the water, you can also control the water when you're using spray water or spray bottles. So let's say you're spraying the water. You can control where it goes by blocking it off with your hand, by using something like paper towel to make sure that it only goes on one part of your page and not another, or by using something like paper towel or the cloth to lift it off, or even a sponge. So let's say we sprayed it down and we got the water to go, but then we wanted to sponge it out. We are then controlling the water and pushing it back. I'm Scarlett. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next class. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Toodaloo.